So, I guess today we're talking about nationalism. That's totally not gonna be awkward. Let's roll the intro. Alrighty guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new around here, then why not go ahead and hit subscribe? I mean, not right now, I'd rather you wait until you've seen the episode to determine whether or not you should actually do that. But if you want to do it right now, I totally wouldn't mind. But normally, the way we do things around here is get into a couple fan art submissions and then move into the video proper. So, without further ado, first of all, we have the pathetic meme by Polar Fox Sparkles, followed by a very cute version of my avatar with Raz's Creepy Eevee's avatar. This one's by Tiny Bepsy Boy, and finally an awesome detailed sketch by Moonlight Cactus. As always, thank you all for your fan art submissions, and let's move right into the video.
I've previously said that Britain leaving the EU will not be enough to solve its immigration crisis or indeed help it reject globalism.
So let's go ahead and get a few things out of the way to begin with. This is Computing Forever, one of the, skeptic-y type people who took the God pill. The dude has started to believe in the hierarchy of the Catholic Church and espouses nationalism. For those who don't know, nationalism is identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion and detriment of the interests of other nations. This is different from patriotism, which is simply devotion to one's country. A patriot may actually not want their country to exploit another country, for example, whereas a nationalist will generally see no problem with the exploitation of another country as long as it is to the benefit of their home country. Hold on to those nuggets of information, they will be important. But to address the first few things he says in the opening 5 seconds of his video, does Britain have an immigration crisis? Well, it certainly is getting more immigrants in it than normal. The immigration rate has gone up, but it seems that while there are 12 births for every 1,000 in the population, there are only 2.5 migrants for every 1,000 of the population, which would seem to me like there isn't exactly a crisis. There are still plenty more citizens native to the country being born within the country, and after the first few generations, people who have migrated will be nationalized anyways. So calling this an immigration crisis is a little bit strange to me. He's also noted that Britain must reject globalism, but globalism is just the operation of planning economic and foreign policy on a global basis. But I'm suspecting that when he says globalism, he's not talking about this, because this type of globalism is just what happens when countries are working cooperatively together in their economies, as opposed to trying to fight each other for resources. Now, if we were to actually trace the use of globalist as a slur, then we would find that it actually has a huge anti-Semitic background. The Anti-Defamation League's Jonathan Greenberg put it this way: where the term originates from is a reference to Jewish people who are seen as having allegiances not to their countries of origin, like the United States, but to some global conspiracy. So it should probably be known that Computing Forever could be meaning globalism, as in cooperation economically with other countries, or it could also be an anti-Semitic slur.
It's important to leave the EU for sure, but leaving isn't going to suddenly make Britain no longer a nanny state, for example.
Here's another term people might not be overly familiar with. A nanny state is any government that is regarded as overprotective or interfering unduly with personal choice.
British society is not going to suddenly reject progressive liberalism and multiculturalism.
So he's saying that progressivism is wrong, which would imply that conservatism is good. Note that he's saying these things on a social level, not on a fiscal level. He's using a lot of loaded words, so we're going to define them as we go so that we know what we're working with. Social progressivism is the belief that society's root issues need to be exposed, dealt with, and corrected. Most progressives aren't really content accepting things as they are for sake of tradition. Tradition is seen as something that's arbitrary as opposed to axiomatic. There's actually an old story that I used to hear that deals with this issue pretty well. A mother is making a ham for her daughter. She cuts off the ends of the ham and puts it in the pan. The daughter asks her why she cuts off the ends of the ham. The mother says that it's because her grandma used to do it. She goes to her grandma, and then her grandma tells her that, well, she started doing it because that's how her mom taught her to bake hams. So she then goes to the old folks' home where her great-grandmother is and asks her great-grandmother why she cut off the ends of the hams when teaching her mentors. The great-grandmother responds that she cut off the ends of the ham because the pan she had was too small, and so she had to cut them off, so that the ham would fit. There was a reason, once upon a time, for cutting off the ends of the ham, but that reason has since gone away. At this point in the story, you're just wasting perfectly good ham. Whereas a conservative would look at the issue and say that the cutting off of the ends of the ham is tradition, and therefore must be honored, a progressive would say that the ends of the ham need no longer be cut off because the reason that they were cut off in the first place is part of an older time and no longer necessary in the present day. If you've ever been on my channel, then you know that I lean towards the progressive side of things. It also helps that I'm a pragmatist, and I don't find tradition useful in and of its own. I find that adherence to tradition can generally stifle progress that can lead to more pragmatic practices. But anywho, hopefully he's not going to throw out any more loaded language that we have to parse out.
The British police aren't suddenly going to stop investigating people's tweets for hate speech. Leaving the EU is a good start, but Eastern European countries in the European Union have shown us that it's possible to preserve one's national identity and secure a people's future without ever having to leave the European Union in the first place.
And this is true. But what does he mean by secure our people's future? That's the part that I would like to know, because it sounds awfully like the 14 words. Note that he's anti-immigration, which would effectively keep Britain more white. And I'm not saying that he's making a direct reference to the 14 words, which are, we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children, but I'm saying that the language gets awfully close.
Poland has been very successful at rejecting EU mandates that it didn't like. This is because Polish society hasn't lost a sense of its own values, faith, and identity. As a result, they have strong borders.
Yeah, historically, Poland does reject multiculturalism. They expelled many ethnic minorities during the 40s and 60s, but I need to sprinkle in some nuance before anybody adds the stamp of ethno-nationalism. Poland seems to view ethnicity a little differently than many others in the world. They view somebody who's ethnically Polish as somebody who is culturally Polish, if I am to understand my research correctly. But that's just a tidbit. Let's continue.
Poland is a country with conviction, and that's as a result of the fact that Poland hasn't succumbed to the demoralization that Western European nations have.
So it should be noted that Poland, when compared to the rest of the Western world, is, well, really, really conservative. Their culture identifies very strongly with a relationship to the church, not just in the way that the churches operate in the United States, where you go every Sunday and Wednesday and just have a good time. Not that I would consider church a good time, but in the sense that Polish society seems to actually agree that the church is very important to their culture in a hierarchical sense. There was an oppressive communist regime in Poland once, and the church was seen as the only refuge from that regime. As a result, their culture's Overton window has shifted very far to the right. And realistically, Poland's only had its current democracy for about 25 years. They're still on pretty shaky ground. The country's been yanked back and forth between regimes for the past 300 years. So holding them as a bastion of cultural identity is kinda strange to me. Poland has very restrictive abortion laws, and if you are any part of the LGBT community, you really wouldn't be accepted into Poland at all. Things have loosened up a little bit since joining the EU. They've gotten pride parades and other types of normalization, but still not a country I'd like to spend a lot of time in, personally. However, fiscally, they aren't quite as conservative. They have public single-payer healthcare, universities are free for a vast percentage of the population, and there is strict gun control within the country's borders. All in all, it's an interesting country to study, especially since they seem to be a very warped version of what we consider conservative here. But again, not a place I'd personally like to step foot in or identify with.
In Ireland, for example, we may be able to get a few nationalist candidates elected next year, hopefully. However, even if by some extraordinary miracle we actually managed to get a nationalist party elected in 8 years, not that that's going to happen anytime soon, but even if we did, I don't believe that it would be able to succeed in the ways that many of us would hope.
Yes, but what ways are you hoping that it would succeed?
And I think the reason for this is because we have not yet won the culture war in Ireland.
Oh my god, you literally believe there's a culture war. You literally see yourself as a culture warrior fighting this war. What a brave soul you are.
And politics is downstream from culture. Most Irish people would likely reject the values and principles of a nationalist government because of the neoliberal cultural zeitgeist. A nationalist government would face huge resistance from the public. Like I said before, there's a spiritual and moral crisis that has to be addressed first. We have to change hearts and minds and help people rediscover their morality, sense of purpose, and meaning.
You see, this is a thing I've noticed Computing Forever doing a lot in his recent videos. He says that people need to find their meaning or need to rediscover their morality, but what I don't think he understands is that people do have meanings and they do have their individual ethics. Those meanings and ethics just might not coincide with what he thinks is the right thing to do. But as Computing Forever has taken the God pill, he seems to think that he knows best about what type of society he would want ran. The morals need to be the morals of the Bible. The purpose needs to be the purpose given to you in the Bible. The national identity needs to be associated with the church. The cultural axioms need to be passed down by the church. He addressed a lot of this in his Taking the God Pill video, and I've got my response to that on my channel if you guys want to check that one out as well. I'll also link it below if you want it for context. But the point is, it seems like Computing Forever is less interested in letting people find their own path, and more interested in setting a path in front of them and giving them a push, thinking that he knows what's best for everyone in his nation.
None of this can be achieved in a vacuous, amoral society which has embraced narcissistic self-interest and materialism.
So by narcissistic self-interest, I'd assume he's just talking about individualism, which is generally a key component in conservatism, being able to seek out one's individual identity as opposed to a collective one. But the other word here that seems really loaded is materialism. While on the one hand we can use the colloquial definition of materialism, a tendency to consider material possessions and physical comfort as more important than spiritual values, there's also the philosophical definition of materialism, which is that all that exists in the world is physical matter, leaving no room for the supernatural. Based on his wording, it sounds like he's using the former definition, the colloquial one, as one of the things that he's lamenting is the tendency for people to consider their material possessions over their spiritual values, bearing in mind that even spiritual values tend to be down to the individual. An individual who is Muslim is going to have different spiritual values than an individual who is Hindu and an individual who's Christian.
We need to understand that a nation is made possible by family values, and that builds stable and safe communities because we prioritize the well-being of our children and therefore our future.
Remember in the Cycles of Fascism episode when I went over the different rhetoric and buzzwords of fascism? How in many cases it's just buzzwords and rhetoric? That's what this feels like to me. National identity, family values, a future for our children. These are all placeholder topics, ideas that have no substance in and of their own. My idea of a national identity is different than his idea of a national identity, and we would probably both consider each other's idea of national identity unimportant. This is why you have to peel back the rhetoric. This is why you have to look past the buzzwords. See what's being said underneath the flowery language.
The aim of nationalism is the well-being and prosperity of the nation, which is the people. The Irish people come first in Ireland, before the economic concerns of global capital and foreign direct investment.
Foreign direct investment. On the one hand, foreign direct investment is just when an entity based in another country invests capital in an entity in your country. There are instances where this is a bad thing. Personally, I think that Tencent owning League of Legends is a bad thing. While their investment has funded many other things within the game's infrastructure that I'm a fan of, there's also been a higher push towards monetization in the game since they took over. Foreign investment by large corporations can indeed be a bad thing. But it seems that the real reason that he doesn't want this investment isn't because there's actual individual problems that could come up as a result of it, it's a rejection of globalization. Computing Forever seems to rather have many individual isolated countries as opposed to creating a society where countries work with each other as opposed to against each other. A very I've got mine, now you get yours approach.
It's hard to convince the propagandized masses who've bought into the globalist agenda that borders are essential for the health of a nation when they've been distracted with the identity politics agenda that's pushed by mega international corporations who see borders as a barrier to their goals.
That's weird. Identity politics are a problem for you? Because it seems to me like in trying to push anti-immigration, you're engaging in those same kinds of identity politics. It's just your identity here is white, as opposed to a minority group. But let's talk about borders and what they are. Borders are arbitrary lines divided between masses of land to establish where one government's ownership of a land begins and where it ends. Or nation, if you will. Now, to computing forever, these borders are axiomatic. They are important because they are an underlying principle that leads to the construction of a nation's identity. But if I can offer an example, did the United States stop becoming the United States when it bought more land or took over more land? Well, no. Our country is still our country. It hasn't changed at all, at least since we took it over savagely. These borders are established when countries are bought, sold, or conquered. But the actual borders themselves are completely arbitrary. When you walk into another country, what's really changed? Well, you might end up finding yourself in another culture, but if I can tell you something about living in the United States, you find yourself in another culture just by going a few miles north of here. It wasn't the arbitrary borders that changed that. So then what are the purpose of those borders? One might say that they're there to keep bad people out and good people in, but we have bad people in our country and good people come in all the time. Moreover, how would you measure bad versus good in this situation? So it can't be that either. So again, I have to ask, what is the purpose of those borders? At the end of the day, it seems that it boils down to tradition. We've traditionally had borders, and so people are comfortable having countries with borders. There's nothing about them that screams necessity to me, at least. But if I'm wrong, then let me know in the comment section below. But the only things that those borders seem to reinforce is prejudice against other countries. Now, I know the topic is a lot more complicated than that. There's a lot of economics involved. There's past history with military conquest and all other things that I'm not getting into right now. But the crux of my issue is that I don't see borders as axiomatic, and computing forever does. And it's not just free trade that I think destruction of those borders would be good for. Here in the United States, there isn't exactly adequate medical care for the people I love, but the amount of hoops that we have to jump through in order to get them to another country where they can receive adequate medical care are absolutely disproportionately massive. And the amount of money you end up having to spend in trying to get to other countries is, well, inordinate. It seems like these borders aren't really helping anyone. Well, they are helping some people. They're helping them clutch pearls.
These corporations want to take advantage of our low corporation tax rate, and also they encourage the government to keep the borders open so that they can import their labour force through mass immigration, thus compressing wages. And this is why globalist corporations spend so much time virtue signalling about social justice causes, because by distracting people with apparent support for individualism and narcissistic identity politics, they can gain support from vocal minority groups, activists, the media and politicians, and deflect any negative attention and criticism away from them.
So, marketing. The thing you're actually having trouble with is marketing. Then could I maybe interest you in a mutual enemy we both have? Because it seems that your problem is capitalism. Commodification of activism? Seems like we share a common enemy there. Though we most certainly won't share a common solution, I'm sure. Also, I love how when he's talking about virtue signaling, he immediately puts up the gay flag behind him, as if we didn't already know that was going to be the flavor of the conversation anyway.
International finance capital successfully avoiding criticism by appealing to identity politics. It shouldn't be all that surprising that human beings derive meaning from things like relationships, marriage, having and raising children, building communities, and being part of a group identity. And in addition, a committed spiritual life as part of that identity helps to develop a life of purpose and structure. A nationalist trajectory would orient our society in a direction that understands this, and government policies would work in order to prioritize this higher quality of life.
A higher quality of life for those who crave that particular quality of life already. But if somebody is so inclined, they can already go down that route. They can get married, they can have kids, they can identify strongly with their national identity, whatever you want to call that. Nothing is actually stopping them. It just so happens that people can pursue other interests instead if they so choose. But what you seem to be arguing for, enforcement of that type of lifestyle. You even said it yourself, governmental encouragement of it.
But for several decades now, the left has done everything in its power to destroy the nuclear family, and in doing so, undermined the key building block of the nation.
What has the left done to destroy the nuclear family? People can still have nuclear families. There's at least 50 of them around my house alone. What the left has done is encourage other types of families that don't necessarily adhere to the nuclear model. Because there are people who prefer those different types of structure. There are people who operate better in, say, polyamorous relationships. There are people who can't even adhere to this nuclear family model due to issues like infertility and poverty. Yet you want to construct a society where that's the model that everybody has to strive for, even if it's not obtainable.
Growing up in a rural part of Dublin, whenever I used to see another beautiful part of the countryside obliterated by another gigantic factory for some multinational, or a crappy, cheaply built housing estate where the houses and apartments are packed tightly together in order to maximize the number of units for greater profits, I was always told that this is what progress looks like. These weren't places you'd actually want to raise a family, of course, but globalists don't care about the family. They care about a docile, drone-like workforce and creating wage slaves who concern themselves only with consuming their products.
Yeah, that's capitalism. That's literally the goal of capitalism. You're currently criticizing capitalism. If you weren't so head-ass, you might actually be able to do some good with that. We agree on a lot of things here, just in this section alone. Corporations aren't your friend. They will literally sell you for $1. Wage slavery is a thing. It's an ultimatum that everyone gets. Wage slavery or die. But like I said before, even though we see the same problem, your solution is nationalism. And if I can paint a picture to show you the problem with nationalism, if every country is nationalistic, then every country will make sure that it will do something to the detriment of another country in order to attempt to further the successes of itself. And there's a word for this type of selfish conflict. It's called war. When you're not willing to consider the negatives to another country because you are trying to get as many positives for yours as possible, you either get exploitation or war, or exploitation leading to war. Nationalism is not a sustainable solution. It relies on arbitrary values that you only think are axiomatic.
But if all that matters is individualism and GDP, consuming product and getting excited for next products, well, then you don't need to build housing estates with the community in mind, or with a proper community town square, public park, a church and a community hall. And people don't need to know their neighbours, right? We can all live as atomized individuals in our box-like apartments and distract ourselves with porn, video games, and going to the shopping mall. So what happens then when the genders are divided, women are in education and the workforce in great numbers? Well, obviously that means birth rates are much, much lower and eventually fall below replacement rates. We've covered that kind of thing before. But more than that, it means that more people are single and alone, and the economic system we live under thrives by having a steady consumer base of unhappy people. Because in the absence of the pursuit of meaning through family and transcendent spirituality and God, people feel all they can do to fill the void in their life is simply consume.
That's not exactly true. People can do more than consume. And actually, on that note, do you not consider trying to achieve spirituality not just another form of consumption? Like, consider this. If you're reading your Bible and trying to seek more spirituality for yourself, trying to transcend, as Computing Forever says, you are simply consuming the Bible. If you're going to your church, you are seeking happiness there, but you're consuming that as well. It's literally entertainment. You are being entertained or taught by your pastor. You are being entertained or taught by your Bible. You are investing either time or money into these things to seek happiness. What you're doing is functionally no different. You're just telling people that they need to seek their happiness in this infrastructure as opposed to a different one. Whereas I would prefer to have a society where people can choose. We agree that people definitely shouldn't just try to fill the void in their lives as much as possible with consumable material, but ideally we can also agree that that same consumable material can be used to further people's lives in a positive direction. If somebody buys a book and reads the book, they may be inspired by that book to then write their own. Same with video games, movies, anything else. It's all part of a cycle. There are some people that simply consume, and then there are others that consume and use it as inspiration to become creatives. But it seems like the society you're wanting to construct doesn't have any of that. It funnels all of that same energy into the church. And I guess that's a cool thing if you happen to be a Christian of the exact orthodoxal flavor that you're going for. But for a Muslim or a Hindu or a pagan or an atheist, you're basically trying to force a lifestyle onto somebody that they don't want. And you wouldn't like it if that was happening to you. Hell, it feels like your video itself is you lamenting being forced into a lifestyle that you yourself don't want. Or at least being upset about the propaganda about it being thrown to you all the time. The problem is that sword cuts both ways. And I'm still willing to stick by and defend the position that seeking spirituality through the Bible or the church is just another form of consumption. It's just one that is Dave Cullen Computing Forever approved. And I think at that point we're going to have to go ahead and end the video for the time being. There's a lot more I want to cover, but we're going to have to get to that in a part 2. So if you want to see that, please hit the bell icon and subscribe. Speaking of consumption though, I do have an affiliate that I want to plug real quick, and they are a plug that sells plugs. Neat plug. as much as it's going to get you guys to yell degenerate in the comment section, or even if Dave Cullen sees this, it'll post a giant irony stamp on this video, why not head over to ddlgplayground.com, and after finding all the things that you want to purchase for you and your loved one, go ahead and use the coupon code Suris to get 10% off. It also really helps me pay the bills. That's a thing it does as well. So that was my plug about butt plugs. If you're happy with my plug, awesome. Go buy some stuff and maybe use my coupon code. If you didn't like it, then buy some stuff and use my coupon code anyway. You can use the plugs to go fuck yourself. Anyways, I'll see you all in the next one, and as always everyone, insert end of video tagline here.